It is time for Bijan Robinson, Drake London, and Kyle Pitts to all hit their full potential with quarterback Kirk Cousins in town. The Falcons are primed to be a massive fantasy success in 2024, and we're here to give you all of our fantasy takes for the entire Atlanta Falcons offense on today's episode of Locked On Fantasy Football.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. I'm one of your co-hosts, Michelle Magdziuk, and when I'm not doing this, I'm a researcher and fantasy analyst with NFL Network.
And I'm your other co-host, Vinnie Iyer. When I'm not doing this, I'm writing about NFL betting and fantasy for sportingnews.com. Very exciting team we'll talk about today, the 2024 Atlanta Falcons.
Yes, we're moving on to the NFC South. We're going through all 32 teams, digging into all of their fantasy takes, giving them one episode per team. We've already gone through the NFC East, North, and West. Now we're starting with the South, and then we're not forgetting about the AFC. We'll get into them next week. But starting with the Falcons here for the NFC South. Listen, I can tell you what they did last year, but it doesn't really matter, right? We know they weren't good last year, besides some decent Bijan Robinson games, but everything's changing. You got to change at head coach. So Raheem Morris, finally, they get rid of Arthur Smith. Unfortunately, Arthur Smith joins with my favorite team, the Steelers, but that's not the point. They changed quarterbacks from Desmond Ridder to Kirk Cousins. Massive, massive upgrade. And, they signed Darnell Mooney. They moved on from Jonnu Smith, but there's a lot of changes here that we have to talk about. But let's talk with the guy that's going the earliest in fantasy drafts, and that's running back Bijan Robinson. It's funny because last year was kind of a disappointment, right? As a rookie, he finishes as an RB9 overall, but only RB17 in average points per game. It's not what we wanted with how high we were drafting him last year. He finished with over 1,400 scrimmage yards and 8 touchdowns, but it still was a disappointing rookie season for what we expected out of Bijan Robinson. He's now being drafted as a running back 3 off boards. Do you think that's fair to expect that kind of jump from Bijan in year 2, Vinny?
Well, I think the biggest thing that we're trying to balance out is it's going to be a more explosive offense. So there's going to be more points. And the biggest disparity I saw here, this is a team that scored 18.9 points per game, which was 26th in the NFL, but they were 17th in yardage. So there was a big disparity. They weren't scoring as much as they should have. Yep. Fantasy points, they were only 24th. So that should not happen with the offensive skill players that they have. So there should be a bigger pie. They just might be less inclined to throw to Bijan Robinson as much in this offense. I think he'll be used still in the passing game because he's a great all-around talent, but maybe that's not the focus. Maybe it's spreading the field out a little bit more. We're going to have a drastic shift from the 12 personnel and to really spread the field with 3 receivers now. You not only have Darnell Mooney joining Drake London, but Rondale Moore. So they could spread the field a little bit, have a slot guy, go 3 receiver sets. So Bijan is explosive enough to exploit those gaps. So it is very high cost because you're looking at him behind Christian McCaffrey and Breece Hall. That's where he's going at running back. So that's what you have to weigh. Is he going to give you that? I mean, anytime you put that kind of expectation on running back, you can only disappoint. But I think there's some excitement and hype worthy of that. Again, the target share is what I'm a little bit concerned with. 17% last year. Is it going to stay the same here with more legit wide receivers as we see it bump up a little bit for Drake London and Kyle Pitts? So, again, I'm thinking that the touches will be maybe a little bit different, that he maybe gets a little bit more work in the passing game. But I think what's going to help him is that he's going to be a little bit more explosive and there's going to be chances for more touchdowns. So I think in the end, that's a net gain here for Bijan Robinson, even though he could see a fewer share of targets, but I'm excited about him. It's just very hard to justify any running back there at RB3 when you have a lot of elite wide receivers that you can feel a little bit comfortable about.
I will say, I'm not too worried about his targets because even if his target share does go down a little bit, they should be passing so much more this year, right? With Kirk Cousins, they should be on the field so much more as well because they're going to be able to sustain drives. So there's going to be more target opportunities to go around. So even if the target share does go down a little bit, that's okay. And then also the carry should increase like crazy, right? The Falcons were one of just 2 teams last year to have multiple players with 175 plus carries last year. The other team was Detroit. this should not be a team that has multiple guys doing this. Like, you drafted Bijan Robinson, a running back 8th overall. When you do that, they should be the workhorse, especially when he has the body type of Bijan Robinson and what he did at school and how explosive he was. But then also when you look at their advanced stats, like, not even close. Robinson was just so much more efficient, right? So I think right off the bat there, hopefully getting Arthur Smith out of town, bringing in Zac Robinson, he knows, like, all right, I'm going to give this to my best guy. And also, both Algier and Robinson ranked top 3 in the NFL in percent of their carries versus a loaded box last year, because teams aren't worried about Desmond Ridder.
Yeah.
So ever. They weren't worried about the passing game. Now with Kirk Cousins there, hopefully he can exploit that, open up some holes, and they're not going to be running against a loaded box each time. So I think his efficiency, his target efficiency as well, and then also, like, hopefully he gets more carries around the goal line, because he had 3 carries inside the 5-yard line last year. That's stupid low. He scored on 2 of them, but like, all of those things should increase for him, and I'm expecting a really great season from Bijan next year.
Yeah, his key volume, his effective volume is going to go up. He's also has a chance to get more yardage and touchdowns. I mean, touchdowns are a quicker way to get those lost receptions pretty quickly, right? I mean, each touchdown you score in half-point PPR is essentially 12 receptions. So when you look at that, and it's really good. And then you look at the satellite so-called Rams offenses here, the Vikings. You look at what they do kind of in Cincinnati. It's been one back, and the Rams itself with when you look at Kyren Williams. So that's good. They tend to be mostly one back offenses. They have situational usage for other guys, but that's also very good for Bijan's chances. So volume, efficiency, scoring, all of that will make up for anything he's lost in targets, if that's the case, even here in 2024. So that's why there's a big jump there from RB17 average to all the way up to RB3. We'll explore the passing game now. I'm excited about that. They have a legitimate passing game. They're going to throw the ball more in Atlanta. We'll just see how that affects everyone. Drake London with Kyle Pitts, Kirk Cousins should be a lot of fun. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered, especially for those road trips that are coming in the summer. You're going to be looking good with a car that's humming as well. With more than 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions do apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. All right. This team is going to be transformed in another way. One of the heaviest running teams in NFL, almost 50-50 last year, not quite there, but they were I think it was 52-48, something like that, passing to running, which you think this day and age, that is a run-heavy team. But you look at all these other offenses, especially Minnesota, they're up there 65%, Cincinnati, they're somewhere up there in the passing. That's a dramatic shift, right? When you're talking about 10 to 12, 13% here in the passing game. So I look at it, man, I look at Cousins. What I like about it, he doesn't have to learn the offense. He has similar terminology from coming over from Kevin O'Connell, Zac Robinson, and him working together. So this is good. He was in average there, QB7 last year. I thought it was going to be a big year. Unfortunately, torn his Achilles there. That cut short the year, but he jumped from QB12 to QB7 in terms of average scoring. Now he's got to fight off a little bit of a mini charge from Michael Penix. We'll see how that goes. But, Michelle, how are you feeling with Kirk Cousins now? Assuming he's got the Achilles all healed up and ready to go over in week 1, I think this is a big opportunity for him.
It's so hard because we don't have any historical data with quarterbacks coming off Achilles. Yeah. So Cousins and Rodgers, it's weird it can be in the same year, can become the first quarterback since at least 2000, that's as far back as this injury data goes, to start in week 1 the following season after tearing an Achilles. Trent Dilfer is actually the last NFL quarterback to tear an Achilles and start another game in his career following that injury. Like in his entire career, start another game after tearing an Achilles. And that was back in 2004. And that's when he tore his Achilles in October 2002. It took over 2 years to come back. So we have no information on how these quarterbacks will be coming off this Achilles tear. Now, we know the medical world has changed so much, and these players are just bouncing back like crazy, but it's really hard to figure out how he's going to be medically. Now, in terms of like if he is perfectly fine and he looks like himself from last year, I mean, yeah, he was fantastic. He led the league in passing yards per game and passing touchdowns per game last year. He had at least 2 touchdowns in 7 of 8 games played. He was great, and he's been great for the last handful of years. I mean, he's third in the league in passing touchdowns since 2019, behind only Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen. And what's also wild, I found, do you know that Kirk Cousins averages the 5th most passing touchdowns per game in a career? A career, minimum 100 games played, but behind only Aaron Rodgers, Peyton Manning, Drew Brees, and Tom Brady. Kirk Cousins averages 1.8 passing touchdowns per game. I just found that crazy. So yeah, like Kirk Cousins is going to be a huge addition to this team. It just comes down to how he can perform coming back from the Achilles.
Yeah, and when we put in some math here with this, I mean, this team threw for 3,775 yards, and that would seem maybe a little high total, given that Desmond Ridder and Taylor Heineke throwing for much of it, but that shows you that you're still going to pass quite a bit in the NFL. Now, that's well less than 250 yards per game, which is kind of standard. If we're talking old school 16-game schedule, that gets you the old 4,000 yards passing. Now that gets you to a little bit over, obviously, 4,250. And with Kirk Cousins, he just would have hit 4,500 again last year if he had stayed healthy. That's a big number. We know that's a big jump. That's 800 yards, significant fantasy production that's up. So if they keep up that rate of passing that we're used to, even if they get up to 60%, 60-40 versus 52-48, you're looking at that 4,000 total being surpassed easily this season. So that says, okay, you have a bigger pool of yardage, right? So that would say translate to the wide receivers and tight ends, that they'll be a little bit more involved. Now, Drake London, very aggressive here, Michelle, with his ranking. I think his ADP is 18, so the drafters like him a little more. Industry have him at 22. He was that was his look at last year. Now you have look at wide receiver 13 on the board, so that's pretty high here, right? I mean, he is, I mean, this is the overall with that ranking here in half point PPR. So he was wide receiver 39 and 45 average. So that's a big jump, right? We're expecting something massive here. He only had 110 targets, 69 catches, 905 yards, and a TD increase that we can see. So I don't know. This is putting a lot on Drake London to have a massive jump. I mean, this is just saying he's going to shoot up 20 spots. I mean, that's really hard to do.
It's really just saying because of Kirk Cousins, right? There'd be no other reason. You can go through his weekly finishes, and the majority of them are absolutely terrible. He only has 3 career games with 100 or more receiving yards. He only has 1 career game with 75 plus receiving yards and a touchdown, right? Fewer than 60 receiving yards in 22 of 33 career games. That's nearly 67% of career games. Now, he hasn't had a quarterback. Like, he's been playing with really bad quarterbacks. So you're saying you're putting all your trust in that Kirk Cousins is going to come in, start to feed Drake London, and everything's going to be beautiful, right? Now, a wide receiver that's played with Kirk Cousins there's been at least one wide receiver each of the 6 years he was with the Vikings have at least 1,000 receiving yards with Kirk Cousins. Adam Thielen, Stephon Diggs in 2018, Stephon Diggs in 2019, and then Justin Jefferson each of the last 4 seasons. So I guess you're just kind of taking it from there. But the one thing Kirk Cousins has been fantastic at is downfield passes, 10 plus air yards. So it should get much better there for Drake London down the field. And then also London hasn't been scoring any touchdowns, right? Yeah. And we should expect that to increase with Kirk Cousins there. Do you know that Cousins threw more passing touchdowns last year in 8 games played than the Falcons had all of last season?
That makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, so I do expect there to be more touchdowns for both Drake London and Kyle Pitts. Like, I won't be surprised if London puts up 1,100 yards and 8 touchdowns. Now, I don't know if that's worth, though, the 18th overall pick in the draft.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that because when I looked at the numbers again, projecting if he goes up based on his kind of average yards per catch, which is like 13 or 14 at this point, I would lean on the higher side of that. I have his targets bumping up by 30. I have his catches going up by half of that. I don't know if he's going to have a dramatic catch rate. I mean, these guys didn't catch a lot of balls. They were all under 60% last year, which is not very good. So I have him for like 85 catches, 1,200 yards in that range, but maybe 7 TDs, 8 TDs, 6 to 8, somewhere in that range. So when you look at that, I mean, if you add up those numbers, he's like DK Metcalf of last year. That's wide receiver 20. So maybe wide receiver 13, just a little bit aggressive, right? That's a massive jump. I mean, wide receiver 39 to 13, 26 spots. I mean, that's a lot of numbers in the increase, but I don't think there's that much there. And also because he's not the only guy in this passing game. You got Bijan out of the backfield. You got Darnell Mooney will be a factor as a deep threat. You mentioned how much Kirk Cousins likes to throw the ball deep, and Kyle Pitts, Rondo Moore, these other receivers that he's going to spread the ball to. So, again, Drake London just maybe a little bit overhyped for me, Michelle.
Yeah, I think it's just a little too risky. It's not saying I can't see the pathway. And I know Drake London's a really good talent and I can see it happening. But like, think about Drake London and George Pickens, right? Those two remind me a lot of each other. And they're both getting these older quarterbacks. Now, Kirk Cousins has been much better than Russell Wilson over the last few years. But I mean, Russell Wilson also is able to throw a lot of touchdowns as well, is able to do the deep ball. But when you look at their average draft position, you have Drake London all the way up at 18, and then George Pickens all the way down at 53rd overall. So it's like, if you're going to take a bet on one of these guys, I would personally prefer to take the bet on George Pickens, who's so much cheaper. They're both risky. They both have great upside. But if you can get one guy 30 picks later, that's the way I would like to go.
Yeah, maybe just a little bit too much. Like we're okay, Arthur Smith is gone, so we bump this guy up 20, but Arthur Smith arriving somewhere doesn't drop a guy either because you're looking at a guy, George Pickens, who went on a surge, finished as a wide receiver 2 last year. So when you look at that, I mean, yeah, there's some numbers that are just sometimes overhyped and inflated, and I think Drake London is one of them. Again, I like him as a wide receiver 2, but a little bit lower than that. I think there's 6 or 7 guys that would take over him.
Yeah. And let me even ask you, like, if you're sitting there at that space where Drake London's typically going in the second round, would you rather just take tight end Sam Laporta and have your tight end in that spot all year long, or go with Drake London? Because I personally think Laporta would be the biggest difference maker on your team than London would be.
Yeah, and I also think when you look at wide receiver 13 to wide receiver 25, I think you're going to have a lot of similar values where Sam Laporta is going to be a lot better than that tight end you're going to get later. So that's the thing, the opportunity cost of that position. Tight end is a better value in relation to the rest of the field, while wide receiver with Drake London is not.
Yeah, I feel ya. We're going to finish up the Falcons talking about your favorite guy, Kyle Pitts. I'm actually on board finally. All right.
Okay.
He got rid of Arthur Smith. He has a new quarterback. I am on board. I don't know if I'm on board with his price, but we'll get into that. And then also maybe Darnell Mooney, Tyler Algier, they might have some fantasy, value as well. We'll finish up the show right after the break. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So Kyle Pitts, after, his fantastic rookie season, wasn't so fantastic for fantasy, but fantastic receptions, receiving yards, only 1 touchdown. He hasn't really done anything the last 2 years, right? He has pretty much the same amount of receiving yards as he had over the last 2 years as he had in his rookie season. And the touchdowns just have not been there. What are you expecting from him now that he gets to play with Kirk Cousins? Because he finished last season as a tight end 14 overall, tight end 17 average per game. Jonnu Smith now is gone. So also, hopefully he'll get more targets from the tight end position. And just how much of an impact does Kirk make to him? Is he worthy of the tight end 6 price he's going right now?
Yeah, Arthur Smith was the heaviest use of 12 personnel. And when he used that 12 personnel, Jonnu Smith was seen equal to Kyle Pitts in a lot of situations. And he was needed on the field to be the blocker. Now, Kyle Pitts is going to be treated as that second receiver or really number one with Drake London at this point. Now, he's going tight end 6 or 7. His ADP overall 61.79. So I think we're seeing a lot of, again, buzz that people are taking him higher than where the industry is ranking him right now in a tight end 7. So that's kind of where he's at right now, tight end 6 or 7, depending on your scoring format. Now, let's look at last year real quick. 90 targets for 53 catches, 667 yards, and 3 TDs. Now, if I'm going to apply the same thing, this kind of a 25% jump here in the production, what you would have here, this is kind of some magic math here for you, Michelle. Get ready for it. You would have 74 catches, 1,000 yards. So going back to 1,000 yards from what we saw in his rookie year, which is attainable. We've seen it before. And 6 TDs. And again, 6 is like the kind of the standard you would have for this receiver. You would put him, based on last year's scoring, around a tight end 7. So maybe this math adds up a little bit better here for him in terms of the projections than it does for Drake London, because again, Pitts is a first-round pick. He's going to be involved all over the field. We also know Kirk Cousins likes to throw in the tight end. TJ Hawkinson was a big factor when healthy together with Cousins last year. He likes the tight end, and it's gone back for a while. And Pitts is a unique tight end. He's a guy that you can scheme open all over the field. They'll do that, right? This is a Rams coaching staff. They'll be like smart. How we get mismatches, how we get him available. So I think they'll, in fact, maybe have a higher ceiling for Kyle Pitts and Drake London in relation to where we think. Because, again, I think he's such a unique talent, and the way you can line him up is a little bit better. He's not going to see the number one corners outside anywhere in any situation. So I'm excited for him. But, yeah, I mean, tight end 7 is just about right. I'm not going to go higher. I may not go much lower, but I think that's where I'm looking at.
Yeah, I'm with you here. Like you're right about Kyle Pitts being a special talent, right? And the reason I was making fun of you all last year is because I just knew with Arthur Smith and Desmond Ridder, it didn't matter, right? Like they weren't using him, and it just didn't matter when they did use him. It was just terrible targets. So to back up your point about how special he is, but the reason why the production hasn't been there. Over 65% of Kyle Pitts' targets have been uncatchable over the last 2 years per PFF. That's the lowest such percent by tight end during that span, and only tight end with a sub 72 catchable percent. And again, he's at 65. It was the 4th lowest among all players during that span, among 122 players with 100 targets. Now, on the other hand, Kirk Cousins has thrown an uncatchable pass on just 14% of targets last year. That was the 2nd lowest rate among quarterbacks, behind only Patrick Mahomes. So we know right off the bat he's going to get way more accurate targets. That's going to help his efficiency tremendously. But then also he's such a good downfield tight end that those don't really exist. So even with Kyle Pitts doing so little over the last couple of years, right? He's still one of 4 tight ends with over 1,000 downfield receiving yards since 2021. The only 3 guys in front of him, and it's very, very close, it's Travis Kelce, George Kittle, and Mark Andrews. And then it's Kyle Pitts. And Kelce has 1,560 downfield receiving yards, while Kyle Pitts has 1,374. It's not that different. So Kyle Pitts does have the capability to be a special difference maker tight end. I would love to finally just see it, but I also think the touchdowns should come, right? It's not like Pitts struggled with scoring touchdowns at Florida. He had 12 in his final season. He should have more touchdowns. He should have the receiving yards. I do think maybe he's worthy of that tight end 6 cost, but at the same time, he is still going around really special players. So let me ask you, Vinny, if you were looking right here, let's say you're in the 5th, 6th round, and you're eyeing Terry McLaurin or Kyle Pitts.
That would be really hard for me because I love both of those guys. My lean would probably be Terry McLaurin a little bit because I know he's the number 1 receiver on his team. We're at Drake London Pitts. I mean, that's how I kind of look at it with the target share. And so I love Terry McLaurin this year. So maybe that's not the best guy here for me to go against Kyle Pitts, who I also like. But when I look at it, I mean, yeah, I'm excited that he's going to be unlocked. And what we've been basically saying here overall, there's 2 major things that have changed for the Falcons passing game. It's actually going to be a passing game. They're going to throw much more than half of the time, and they stunk throwing the ball the last couple of years. Between Marcus Mariota and Desmond Ridder and Taylor Heineke, they were awful. This is one of the worst passing games and didn't pass a lot. So what does that add up to? Really getting underachieving receivers here. But I'm excited with these guys, and I think that if you give me some other names, I think I would be kind of more leaning towards Kyle Pitts. But I expect, again, if you look at him as tight end 7, the way he is now, I think you're going to be in good shape, and you won't overdraft him or underdraft him.
Yeah, the other guys going around him, Christian Kirk, Aaron Jones, Chris Godwin, Calvin Ridley, Ramondre Stevenson. I'm fine with taking Kyle Pitts over all of those
Yeah, I would
guys.
take 100%. So
Yeah. It is
you had to
interesting.
bring
Let
up
me
McLaurin. The one guy wouldn't have in that group, but yeah.
So Dalton Kincaid's going 10 picks earlier than Kyle Pitts. Would you rather pay that 1 round earlier for Kincaid or wait on Pitts?
I just don't know what's going to go with the Bills passing game. I do like Kincaid, but I still don't necessarily say he's going to be in the top 2 of the targets, where I'm pretty sure with Drake London, he's going to be Kyle Pitts in the top 2 of targets with the Falcons.
What about Darnell Mooney? Any interest in taking him super late, going as wide receiver 70? I mean, he's going around mostly rookies, right? He's going around Jalen Polk and Ricky Pearsall and Roman Wilson and Troy Franklin. Like, would you rather take a shot on a rookie late or go with a guy that's going to be the second wide receiver for Kirk Cousins this year? We've seen him, be able to sustain 2 wide receivers and even Hawkinson, right? With Jordan Addison, Justin Jefferson. And I guess it wasn't that long of time that we got all those 3 together. But any interest in Mooney?
I would keep an eye on it for sure, because they paid him quite a bit. If you look at it, $13 million, I think, per season. I think he's a good talent. He hasn't been healthy. He hasn't had a great quarterback. That's been an issue here. But he is a deep threat, so he's going to be rather inconsistent, especially with London Pitts. He's going to be down to the 3. I mean, when he was putting up some numbers early in Chicago, he was the default number 1 because they had nobody else. So that's something you keep in mind. So deep threat is going to be inconsistent, but I would put him on that early watch list on the waiver wire. I don't think I would draft him. I mean, it's way too easy to pick him up later at this point, but just keep an eye on him, because I think he'll be a bigger factor than we think.
Yeah, I think like with Darnell Mooney's, you can find them in the waivers all the
Yeah.
time, right? It's really
Yeah.
easy to
There's
find
somebody
those
else there.
veteran, deeper wide receivers on waivers. I would probably in this area, if you're in a super deep league, like I'd rather take a shot on a guy like Quentin Johnston or Troy Franklin, who obviously has a much higher ceiling, right? For Mooney to be great, he would need either Pitts or London to suffer an injury, and maybe in that case, he would be really good. Now, what about Tyler Algier? I think if you draft Bijan Robinson, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th overall, right? You almost have to go with Algier because you can get him with your last pick, and he's probably the best handcuff that you can roster. We know like he would get all the workload. In my opinion, he'd get all the workload. He definitely was not as efficient as Robinson, but he's still a good running back. I have no interest in taking him if I don't roster Bijan Robinson, but do you agree with me that if you roster Bijan, you should be taking Tyler Algier?
Yeah, right now Algier has no standalone value, as you mentioned. The backup situation is kind of cloudy right now. They did draft Jace McClellan out of Alabama, but he's had an injury, so that's put him back here in the early part. I think it was to his foot, so that's put him back here. Yeah, Algier might be ending up as one of the better surefire handcuffs in all the NFL, and what we like in kind of the situations we talked about, Cincinnati, Minnesota, Los Angeles, there was a clear backup. If someone went down, they had someone who's going to get a lot of touches. So Algier, I mean, yeah, you got to get him if you have Bijan, because you can plug and play him pretty much if that would occur to Bijan and him missing time again.
Yeah, I think if Bijan misses time, Algier would be a really solid running back
Solid,
to
yeah.
roster. And maybe we're overvaluing how much Bijan workload will change this year. Maybe Algier will still be just as involved. Hopefully not. But he did lead the team in goal line carries. Hopefully that doesn't happen. But
Yeah.
we'll see. We'll see with Tyler Algier. I have no desire to roster him if I'm not drafting Bijan Robinson. But in that case, if I do, I would be open to drafting Algier with my last pick because he'll be sitting there and just for that insurance. Just closing thoughts here on the Falcons. So they have the 8th overall pick again this year, or 8th or 9th, whatever it was. And instead of drafting another weapon or a defensive guy, they go with quarterback Michael Penix Jr. What do you take of that? Do you see him playing at all this year? Like if Kirk Cousins does struggle, does he get in, or is it just Kirk Cousins' team the whole year, no matter what he does?
Well, I think the one thing we would worry about is Kirk Cousins, more so than him struggling if there's some occurrence with injury or durability breaks down. I mean, he's 35, so that could happen again. But he's been one of the more durable quarterbacks before last year. So that was a bit of a fluke. I mean, Achilles is a fluke when we talk about not a lot of guys recovering from it. And then you have Aaron Rodgers and Kirk Cousins having the same injury at different stages of the season. Now, so far, Michael Penix has looked good. I think if something were to happen to Cousins, I think he would have some really good value here. I mean, he's going to get some weapons. He is trying to show that he can run a little bit more. He didn't really do that at Washington or Indiana as much as he could have, but he is a capable athlete. If that was there, that would not be a big part of what he does, but I think he's handling this offense pretty well. I thought he was a perfect fit for this offense. So again, Cousins is who you're drafting and believing will start all year at that price that he's making. So yeah, just keep an eye on Penix though, because I would like him if something happened to Cousins over a lot of guys that you could pick up off the waiver wire just by the nature of the weapons in the offense.
Yeah, he has a great arm. Weapons are great. Like, yeah, I would be interested if Kirk Cousins were to get injured.
Offensive line's good too. So
nothing you have to pay attention to during draft season, hopefully, right? Like, hopefully Kirk Cousins is good to go for the season. But that is it for today's show. Thank you to all for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. Every dayers will be back on Monday. Enjoy your weekend. Bye, y'all.